Okay, welcome back to the deep dive. Today, we are moving past the usual talk about basic digital literacy. We're exploring something, well, much deeper. How do some dedicated professionals achieve genuine technology mastery inside institutions that, let's be honest, often struggle to keep pace?
It's a critical question, isn't it? That gap between the pioneers and the rest.
Exactly. So, our mission today is to really dissect this fascinating study focusing on university lecturers in Ghana. We're looking specifically at the exemplars. These are the top 20 high performers who really succeeded in integrating ICT, information and communication technology into how they teach.
The ones who went the extra mile.
Right. We want to decode their secrets for that self-driven success, definitely. But maybe even more importantly for you listening, we want to expose the systemic bottlenecks, the things holding back wider adoption across the whole university.
That contrast is absolutely key. The source material is this, well, it's a really insightful study. It's rooted in what researchers call hermeneutic phenomenology.
Okay. Sounds technical. Break that down a bit.
Yeah, it just means they went deep. Instead of just surveys, they conducted really in-depth interviews with these 20 selected lecturers. The goal was to truly understand their lived experience, the personal journey, the challenges, the whole process of developing these skills.
So less about numbers, more about the story behind the success.
Precisely. It's an exploration of how individual will often clashes with, well, institutional inertia.
Okay, let's unpack this then. If we want others to succeed, we need to know what lit the fire in the first place. What drove these top performers when the system itself wasn't really pushing everyone? Was it orders from above or something else?
Well, that's what the first research question digs into.
Yeah.
What motivated these specific lecturers? And the findings were pretty clear. The drivers were overwhelmingly intrinsic.
Intrinsic, so from within. Not because they were told to.
Exactly. This wasn't about mandates. It was fundamentally about personal drive and, interestingly, perceived professional need. The study identified 5 main intrinsic drivers. And the ranking is, I think, quite revealing. The top 2 forces were purely personal. Get this, a huge 90% cited sheer personal interest.
90%, just because they liked tech.
Pretty much a genuine interest in ICT and this deep-seated drive to stay relevant, in the 21st century. That was massive. And right behind that, at 70%, was the desire for working smart.
Ah, okay, so efficiency, that makes sense. Technology wasn't just another task. They saw it as a tool to make their jobs easier.
Precisely. Simplifying things like lesson prep, grading assessments, sharing materials online, they saw it as a path to professional efficiency.
But wait a second, 70% is high. But if tech makes life so much easier, why didn't, all of them mention working smart? Why not 100%?
That's a really sharp observation.
Yeah.
It suggests that even for these motivated individuals, there's still a perception of significant initial effort, a barrier to overcome.
Right. So you almost have to have that strong personal interest first, that 90%, to push through the initial learning curve, even if you know it'll pay off later in efficiency.
I think that's a fair reading. The passion fuels the persistence needed to unlock the efficiency gains. Okay, so moving down the list. The third big driver for about 65% was innovation.
Meaning?
Just the basic need to move beyond traditional methods, the chalk and talk approach. They wanted newer ways for teaching, for finding information, for assessment. And the study noted this was especially strong among younger lecturers.
A desire for relevance, again.
Yes. Then, around half, 50%, mentioned helping others.
Okay, tell me more about that one. That sounds different.
It is. This was about motivation stemming from assisting their peers, maybe becoming the go-to tech person in the department, and also, quite significantly, serving students with disabilities.
How so?
By using ICT to create accessible materials like audiovisual content for students with hearing or visual impairments, that sense of service was a powerful motivator for that group, being useful to others.
You can see how that feeling, empowering a student, helping a colleague, could be way stronger than some memo from admin, couldn't it?
Absolutely. It taps into personal values. And finally, the fifth driver, for about 40%, was lifelong learning.
Just keeping up.
Essentially, yes. Staying current with research in their field, which ICT obviously helps with, and recognizing that this also aided their own career progression through publications and things like that.
Okay, so this is really interesting. If the main engines here are personal interest, efficiency, innovation, helping others, and staying current, it really suggests success isn't primarily about top-down mandates. It's more about fostering an environment where people see the personal and professional value.
That seems to be the core message on motivation.
But, personal drive on its own often isn't enough, is it? You need some support, some enabling factors. So what fostered this success? What helped them along the way?
Right, that brings us neatly to the second research question. What factors actually supported or, fostered this professional development for ICT integration? And the findings here show this kind of mix of impressive personal resilience and, frankly, pretty limited institutional support.
Let's talk about the personal side first, because the source material had a finding there that really jumped out at me.
I think I know the one you mean.
Huh.
The role of family support. This was honestly one of the most striking findings. About half of the actual knowledge and practical skills these lecturers acquired for using technology in their teaching came from help from their relatives.
Half? You mean like spouses, kids, siblings?
Exactly.
Yeah.
They were the ones helping troubleshoot tricky tech problems, sometimes even helping produce instructional media.
Wow. Okay, let's pause on that. Half their crucial upskilling came from unpaid help at home. It sounds like the institution is effectively offloading a core training responsibility onto families.
That's certainly one interpretation, and a strong one. It highlights a significant gap in the formal support structures, doesn't it? The success relied, in part, on this invisible, uncompensated network.
It really does. What else on the personal side?
Well, the study also noted that lecturers who had a background in science or maths generally found it easier to pick up ICT skills. Perhaps logical, given the analytical nature.
Okay.
And there was also this drive for creating a professional niche, wanting to be seen as outstanding, as relevant, avoiding becoming, quote, obsolete. That ambition pushed them towards mastering digital tools. They were essentially creating their own specialty.
Self-made digital pioneers within their departments. Okay, so that's the personal resilience and the informal support. What about the institution itself? What support did they actually provide?
The institutional side was more about the basics, foundational but not comprehensive. They did offer basic support services.
Like what?
Things like periodic general training sessions, how to use Moodle, which is the learning management system, or OSIS, the student info system, plus standard Microsoft Office stuff. And importantly, they did have some technical staff available for one-on-one coaching. The study notes lecturers really preferred this personalized help because it was more flexible than big generic workshops.
That one-on-one aspect sounds crucial.
It seemed to be valued, yes.
Yeah.
And they also provided the necessary ICT facilities, the hardware laptops, projectors, some digital boards, and access to specialized units like an African virtual university center where they could find resources or experiment.
So the basics were there, some gear, some initial training, some individual help if you sought it out.
Correct. The essential building blocks, you could say.
Okay, so if these exemplars had the motivation, the personal drive, and at least some basic tools and support, why wasn't everyone else doing it? What was actively hindering wider adoption? Let's dive into those institutional bottlenecks now, because this really explains why it's still such a challenge, right?
Exactly. Connecting this to the bigger picture, the hindering factors identified in the third research question really show where the system starts to break down for the majority. The study points to 4 main systemic failures.
Let's hear them.
Okay, first, and maybe the most tangible barrier, was simply a lack of adequate funding. Lecturers mentioned this online teaching support allowance the university provided. It was meant to augment their standard book and research allowance to help with tech needs.
But it wasn't enough.
Apparently not. Not enough to buy the necessary, maybe higher-end devices they felt they needed, or crucially, to pay for specialized advanced training. Things like courses in multimedia production, advanced graphic design, or attending international EdTech conferences.
And because these advanced skills weren't formally required or rewarded.
Precisely. Lecturers were understandably reluctant to spend significant amounts of their own money on acquiring them. There was no real return on investment recognized by the institution.
So a clear economic disincentive to go beyond the basics. Okay, what was barrier number 2?
This ties into the training issue. Limited and generic PD programs. Professional development. The training the university did offer was consistently described as, well, one size fits all. Very basic, often remedial, and it just failed to meet the diverse needs of lecturers across different subjects and at different skill levels.
So if I'm teaching, say, art history, a generic workshop on spreadsheets isn't very helpful, right?
Exactly. It wasn't tailored. It didn't address the specific pedagogical needs of integrating technology into, say, literature versus engineering versus nursing. And because it felt irrelevant, many lecturers simply didn't participate. It actually deterred engagement.
Yeah, a training program only works if people feel it helps them do their actual job better. If it's not specific, why bother?
That was the feedback. Then the third hindrance was inadequate technical support. And this was a problem of both quantity and quality.
How so?
Well, quantity was an issue. The study mentions a really small team, like 4 tech experts for the entire university. So response times for help were often slow.
4 people for a whole university. Ouch.
Yeah. But the quality issue was perhaps even more critical. The technical support often lacked, and this is key, pedagogical context.
Ah, the difference between fixing the machine and knowing how to teach with the machine.
You got it. They could help if your projector bulb blew or maybe reset your password, but they couldn't really advise a lecturer on, say, the best digital simulation tool for teaching chemistry concepts or how to design an effective online discussion forum for a philosophy class.
You need someone who understands both the technology and the teaching aspect, the pedagogy.
Without that blend, the support, while technically functional, isn't educationally transformative. It's incomplete.
Okay, so inadequate funding, generic training, and tech support that lacked teaching insight. What was the final and maybe biggest barrier?
Well, according to the study, the factor that really allowed the majority of non-integrating lecturers to kind of maintain a relaxed attitude was the lack of institutional competency requirement.
Meaning the university didn't actually require tech skills?
Essentially, yes. There were no clear-cut formal requirements for technology integration competency when it came to hiring new lecturers, appraising current ones, or, crucially, for promotion.
No yardstick.
Exactly. No formal benchmark. And because using ICT effectively wasn't tied to job security or career advancement, well, it removed all the extrinsic pressure.
Wow, that lack of a requirement, that lack of a clear standard for promotion, that sounds like the single most effective way for an institution to just guarantee inertia, doesn't it?
It certainly seems to be a major factor.
If mastering these tools isn't necessary to get hired, keep your job, or climb the ladder to senior lecturer or professor, then the system itself is basically telling people it's nice but not essential. Why would the average person invest the huge amount of time and effort needed for mastery if just doing the minimum yields the same career result?
That's precisely the conclusion the study points towards. The system, unintentionally perhaps, fails to incentivize the very behavior it says it wants.
So let's tie this all together. What does this mean for other institutions, maybe even outside Ghana, facing similar challenges? You've got these amazing exemplars succeeding through sheer force of will, propped up by informal help like their families.
Right.
But the institutional barriers, the lack of funding, generic training, incomplete support, and especially no formal requirements mean that tech integration just stalls out. It doesn't spread beyond that highly motivated core group.
That's the takeaway. The study really confirms that without significant structural changes, relying on individual self-directed learning just isn't enough to overcome these systemic weaknesses. You can't scale success based purely on willpower. The recommendations that come out of the study are pretty robust, and they target those structural flaws directly.
Okay, so for anyone listening, maybe an administrator, maybe a lecturer themselves, what are the actionable things institutions need to do to fix this?
Well, first and foremost, the study strongly recommends formalize incentives. Make technology integration an explicit key requirement for lecture appointments and, critically, for promotion. Inject that missing extrinsic pressure.
Make it count for career progression. Got it.
Second, ditch the one-size-fits-all approach. Implement tailored PD professional development programs that are needs-based, specific to disciplines, and go beyond the basics. Offer advanced options.
Training that's actually useful for teaching their subject. Makes sense.
Third, increase support. And that means both more ICT staff to reduce wait times and ensuring those staff are equipped to provide not just technical help, but also pedagogical guidance. Hire people who understand teaching and tech.
Quality and quantity. Okay.
Fourth, resource provision. This falls on both university management and potentially government funding bodies. Provide adequate funding and ensure access to necessary tools, maybe through subsidized equipment programs, and resources for that advanced training people need.
So put your money where your mouth is.
Essentially. And finally, leverage the talent you already have. Encourage peer mentoring. Actively support and maybe even incentivize these exemplar lecturers to formally coach and mentor their colleagues who are struggling or reluctant.
Use the internal champions to spread the knowledge.
Exactly. Formalize that informal sharing.
That point about the job requirement really stands out, though. If mastery isn't actually required for advancement, the incentive structure is just fundamentally broken for the majority. The institution has to signal it genuinely values this by making it non-negotiable, for getting ahead.
It seems to be the linchpin, yes. And this whole picture, it raises a final, maybe quite provocative thought for us to consider.
Go on.
Given this heavy reliance we saw on intrinsic motivation, on people carving out their own niche, and especially on getting critical skills support for free from their families, how much of what we call effective 21st century education, particularly in environments where resources are tight, is actually being built not on official policies and budgets, but on the hidden, uncompensated sacrifices of dedicated individuals and their immediate families?
That's a powerful question.
It's a cost, a significant one, that never shows up on the university's balance sheet. But it seems to be subsidizing the future of education in these contexts.
Right.
Something to think about.